Summit, the African Union Summit's Directorate of Politics has expressed concern that the continent may be sliding back to the era of manipulation of the constitution to suit incumbents. Speaking on the sidelines of the summit, the Director of Political Affairs at the Commission, Dr Khabele Matlosa, warned that Africa risks losing democratic gains made in the last 20 years. SABC correspondent Sarah Kimani filed this report.
As Africans, we need to sit and reflect and critically where the continent is coming from and where we are now and where we are going in terms of democratization. In my humble opinion, we made good progress, with the transitions of the 1990s after the collapse of the Cold War and the collapse of demise of apartheid in South Africa. We made good progress, with the, abandoning military coups, abandoning one-party regimes, and introducing multi-party systems marked by regular elections. That's good progress. But now, presently, there are worrying trends because much as we have done away with the interstate conflicts, intrastate conflicts are still with us, and most of these intrastate conflicts emanate from governance deficit. And one of the key deficits we have now is that of constitutional, should I call it manipulation of constitutions, to be more frank, to be more upfront, manipulation of constitutions, where incumbent presidents or heads of state and government manipulate constitutions to stay in power, to prolong the tenure in power, and do it in an undemocratic and unconstitutional manner. That's the problem.
But what can your department do in such a case?
Yes, we have a role to play there as the Department of Political Affairs at the African Union Commission, because remember we have the Charter, the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. That charter is very clear on how constitutions are supposed to be changed, and how if you don't follow that route, that change will amount to an unconstitutional change of government. We have Article 10 of the Charter. It prescribes precisely how our member states are supposed to go about changing their constitutions in a democratic and constitutional manner. And then we have Article 23, subsection 5, sub-article 5, which indicates that if you don't follow the democratic route, you are changing the constitution may amount to an unconstitutional change of government.
So in such a case, you can suspend a country?
In such cases, we're bound to take action. We had a case like that, for example, in Burundi. Yes, in Burundi we had a case, and we advised the authorities in Burundi that they should not go that route, and look where the country is now, in terms of violence. Only yesterday or this week at least, if a senior government official, a lady, a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, was assassinated. Now look at that. Now a country like where we are now, this country, at least in terms of their process, when they amended their constitution, they at least followed. So they followed Article 10 to the letter. So that's why you don't see violence in this country after the change. But you see violence in Burundi because Burundi followed Article 23, subsection 5, which is a problem. So we advise our heads of state and government, our leaders on the continent, to ensure that we entrench a culture of constitutionalism and rule of law on the continent, and avoid changing constitutions undemocratically and unconstitutionally.
Is holding regular elections enough? Because one of the things most countries will tell you is, we had an election, I was voted in. The other country will say the same thing. Is elections enough?
It's not enough, my sister. The election is part of the larger package. Holding elections regularly, yes, could be progress, but that's not the end of the story. Elections are not synonymous with democracy, and democracy is not synonymous with elections. So in between elections that come every 5 years, remember, you have to entrench citizen participation. You have to entrench citizen participation in between elections. You have to ensure that also development is equitably distributed, so that each and every citizen, they feel that their welfare has been taken care of. So elections in and of themselves do not amount to democracy.
One of the countries that has really had a troubled past, more than 20 years of civil war, It's 5 years old now, and we're still seeing the same problems that they had the 20 years ago in South Sudan. What is your department doing about South Sudan?
South Sudan is a very painful case for the African Union, even for IGAD and other regional organizations. Because South Sudan actually was supposed to be celebrating its 5th anniversary as an independent nation, the newest nation of the AU, the newest nation of the United Nations. But South Sudan, the war has now erupted again. I think what needs to be done, in my view, is that we need to look at the root causes of this conflict relapse in South Sudan. And I think that, frankly, 3 elements account for what is happening in South Sudan now. First is the leadership issue. Leadership issue has to be addressed in South Sudan. It's very clear that the current president and the vice president are not together. And that has to be addressed. Whether going forward, they still need to be kept as the ones leading this country. And it's citizens of South Sudan that need to make that determination. That's first. Second, the issue of the military in South Sudan. The military in South Sudan is divided down the middle. You have a military camp supporting the president, a military camp supporting the vice president. That's not sustainable. You cannot build a national army along those lines. That's number 2. That needs to be addressed. So you need to address the issue of also security sector reform in South Sudan to unify the army. Thirdly, the issue of diversity in South Sudan is a big issue. You know, you have the big ethnic groups, exactly, the Dinga and the Nuer. And by the way, there's no problem in Africa if we have differences, ethnic, racial, gender, etc., etc. There's no problem. The problem is how you manage it, how you manage diversity. Diversity is not a problem in and of itself. The problem is how it is managed. So South Sudan has to come to grips with how to manage its ethnic differences constructively. And finally, the issue of underdevelopment in South Sudan, it's a major issue. Underdevelopment in South Sudan, inequality, unemployment, exclusion. You need to address those things, because now when you combine this underdevelopment with corruption, it complicates the whole story. So these issues have to be addressed. Once we address this, we will be able to arrest the current problem in South Sudan, where close to 300 people have been killed, and thousands displaced within South Sudan, and others, many more, outside as refugees.
Finally, you are in charge of immigration. Your department is also in charge of immigration.
Absolutely.
And top of the agenda during this summit is the launch of the African passport.
Absolutely.
What is the African passport, and what will it help? And is it really a priority at this time for the continent?
Definitely, it's a major priority. I want to repeat, it's a major priority. And in fact, in my own humble opinion, this is going to be the major achievement of this summit in Kigali, Rwanda. It's going to be a major achievement, because the issue of the African passport is not just about the passport, by the way. It's bigger than just the passport. It's bigger in the sense that it reminds us that we have a commitment on the continent to open borders to our citizens, so that there's free movement of persons across the continent. And what we are seeing in the EU now is not what we want to emulate. The EU, with the Britain exiting from the EU and threatening the Schengen regime they have of free movement, is not the route to go. That's against integration. As we're emphasizing the issue of integration and ensuring that our citizens on the continent are able to move freely throughout across borders on our continent. Presently, we have a problem where our citizens are not able to move. In fact, the irony of it all is that Europeans, if I may put it that way, or at least foreign nationals, move easier on our continent, throughout our continent, than Africans themselves. It's a problem. And once we are able to ensure free movement of persons, we encourage intra-Africa trade and investment. We also encourage people to enjoy moving across the border, like for example informal traders, who most of whom are women, to make a living across our borders. That's the whole essence.
President Jacob Zuma is among those attending the two-day gathering, which will also assess progress made in the eradication of the abuse of women and children. Several AU leaders have called for African countries to leave the court based in The Hague because they say it unfairly targets Africans. They want the continent to have its own court for dealing with human rights abuses. The Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir, who for some years has defied the IEC arrest warrant over alleged atrocities in Darfur, is in Kigali. This is after the Rwanda promised he would not be arrested. The two-day summit will also discuss the crisis in South Sudan and plans for an AU passport, which will eventually allow visa-free travel in all 54 member states.